Polygamy, again, this is another one of those things where everything is not written. There are Christian traditions, there are Catholic parishes in Africa and in Asia where polygamy is the rule of the day, simply because that is the cultural milieu in which the people live, and it is the survival mode for the tribe or the community. So, however, here in the United States, polygamy is not recognized as legitimate for Christians or other people. But again, I have to emphasize that it has more to do with the cultural milieu and the way the community and the society is organized than with specific religious teaching.
Thank you. 5 basic points. One is the question, did Islam invent polygamy? Because again, and by the way, the correct word is polygyny, not polygamy, just for correction. Anyway, the answer to that is obviously no, and I refer you to work of one of the most prominent sociologists, anthropologists, that's Edward Westermark, in his 2-volume work, History of Human Marriage, in which he describes how polygyny was practiced in many nations and religions, including among Jews and Christians. That's a long story, but he documents all that. That's no problem. So that's the point that I'd like to emphasize, even though it sounds simple, but it's not simplistic, because typically in the West, polygamy or polygyny and Islam is one and the same. And the moment somebody asks you, what's your name? Muhammad. Your religion? Islam. Third question, how many wives do you have? This seems to be the pattern of thinking. Another point that needs to be dispelled also, that polygamy is something that really goes with Islam. And I must clarify that in terms of the commands of Sharia, it is not an order. It is not a command on the Muslim. There is no indication, even any conclusive text that shows that it is even desirable. Its classification in the scale of 5 points in Islamic law, what you should do, should not do, is the mubah, permissible. Thirdly, the same Quran, there's only one ayah actually that deals with this. In the same surah where this occurred, it says that if you fear that you will not be just and fair between your wives, then marry only one. And then later on it says you will never be totally, fair if you have more than one wife. Which means actually, even though it does not prohibit it outright, it seems to indicate that in Islam, like in many other religions, monogamy actually is the rule, polygamy is the exception. And if we were to say that the basic rule of Islam is 4 wives, which is the maximum per man, you're talking about a demographic structure where you have 80% females and 20% male, and this is unheard of. My 4th point is that the proper interpretation also of the Quran is to look into the occasions of revelation, which might give some insight into the meaning. And this verse in the Quran that dealt with marriage of up to 4 actually was revealed after the battle of Uhud, in which scores of Muslims, dozens of Muslims were martyred, leaving behind their wives, the widows, and their children, the orphan children who needed some help and support. So that perhaps might shed some light. And the Prophet himself took the lead in marrying some of the women who were just about his age or older, people in the 50s like Salama, with 5 orphan children. And that was quite clearly a humanitarian gesture to teach others that he should take care of them, because a widow is not just waiting for some handout or somebody to give her food. She needs the warmth of a home. Children need a father figure also for their upbringing. And finally, why didn't Islam prohibit it? Of course, there is definitely, and I agree with Sister Jane on this, sometimes we get too ethnocentric, and we think that something that might not suit our culture here in America should be applicable anywhere in the world, under all cultures, all circumstances, at all times. And this is, from the anthropological standpoint, quite nonsensical, really. Obviously, there are needs, there are places where polygamy might serve a function. And even today, in the 20th century, and give one example of Afghanistan, 1.5 million people were martyred or killed during the Russian invasion. Some women and children, yes, many, but the great majority are men. What to do with this great imbalance in a small nation between the number of men and women? What to do with the widows? What to do with young girls also are reaching the age of puberty and are looking for marriage? And what to do with the orphans? Obviously, in that case, a Muslim should not approach it by way of apology or anything. Actually, it's positive. It is a much more humane and moral solution to many problems in different places in different times.
Thank you, Dr. Jamal. Do you have any comments? They took more time, so you still have some credit if you want to.
I think that
okay.
That discussion is very helpful.
Okay, then let's talk about the last point on this part, which is, can a woman be a feminist and religious at the same time? Maybe for the benefit of the audience, we define first, Sister Ayesha, define first what you mean by feminist and then go into the question.
All right. As a point of personal preference, my opinions and references to this, I am most directing to the Muslim members of this audience more than to the sisters who I already know basically we have an agreement about this. Feminism, the term a feminist, let's define it first. It denotes a concept of equality for women, whether in their home, the workplace, or on the street while going grocery shopping. This is not a radical viewpoint. This is simple equity and equality. To me, in Islam, one can be a feminist and a religious, spiritual person at one and the same time. There is no violence of conflict. If we look in the early days of Islam, we have thousands of women, literally at least 2,500 women at a conservative estimate, who transmitted the deen of Islam and who taught, were extremely brilliant, were noted as legal scholars, jurists, and poets. Salama, who often stood up to the very opinionated Omar, repeatedly is a prime example of such a woman. Ayesha literally fought with the Caliph, Ali, when she felt that he was wrong. She debated legal points. One of the greatest transmitters of hadith in the early days of Islam. The lady named Yaqub once stood up when she heard a legal point explained by Abdullah ibn Masud and told him, I have read the entire Quran and have not found your explanation anywhere in it. And she didn't back down from her opinion. We have the teacher, Sayyida Nafisa, the granddaughter of Hassan, who taught Imam al-Shafi. Even Omar, who was never noted as a champion of women's rights, appointed Shaka bin Abdullah as the inspector of the market in Medina. If he had had any concerns that it was not permitted for women to be working outside the home, or especially in marketplace of all places where she would be in constant daily contact with men, and I'm sure Omar would never have appointed her to such a position. Muhammad al-Ghazali, the modern scholar of Islam, has called this exclusion of women in Islam, and I quote from his article, The Rise of Bedouin Fiqh. This is not Islamic. While I'm not going to sit here and argue about Bedouins, I do support his general statement that for women who transmitted and taught 1/4 of the deen of Islam, it is a pathetic shame that women are not accepted as scholars today. You rarely see Islamic women giving conferences and teaching in economics and in other fields where they have every right to be prominent. I believe our confusion about this lies in terms of equality of rights versus equal identity. In the West, we do have some confusion with this. I personally went through this problem. We are not identical to men, nor do most feminists that I've ever met want to be a man. However, we have confused the identity with equality in the West because of the nature of the fight. If men set the criteria, and they set it as economic independence, aggressiveness, the ability to climb that corporate ladder no matter what, then that criteria is set for us women, and that's what we have to do to get ahead. This, in many cases, violates the nature of women, which I do believe is different from men. We do tend to be generally more interpersonally skilled, more collaborative. We like more participation with others than men do. But in many cases, in this country in particular, we've had to violate some of that nature in order to advance. If you're in a power struggle, and this is a power struggle in the West, then you have to fight with whatever criteria the people in charge have given you. This is not true in Islam. And I do believe we have a very prime example of how to be a good woman and a good feminist at the same time.
Thank you. Please.